Hi, I'm Roy Collin, the host of the podcast. You can find everything about me by scanning the QR code there or going to roycollin.com, and you'll find my 6 podcasts: the Podfather, helping people become podcasters; the Awakening, exposing fraud and corruption but with solutions; the Crypto, all things blockchain technology; meditation podcast; speaking podcast; and the Learn Polish podcast. You can also help the show by actually making a donation, visiting the store, or helping my sponsors. I hope you enjoyed this week's show. Welcome to the Speaking Podcast. You can find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com. My guest today, from Ottawa, Canada, but not there at the moment, global speaker, 3 times #1 international best-selling author. That's a fantastic achievement. And a high-end speaker coach. Please welcome Steve Lowell. Did I do it correct?
You're close enough, Roy.
Because we talked prior to speaking that it's pronounced differently around the world depending on where you are. Yeah.
Well, I pronounce it Lowell. Folks in Europe pronounce it Lowell, and folks down in New Zealand pronounce it Lowell. So all are acceptable.
I've heard you talk that you started from 6 years of age speaking, so I know you've got fantastic experience. But how does somebody start at 6 years of age?
Right. So I wasn't a speaker at 6 years of age, but I was on stage at 6 years of age. So I was a young guitar player, and I was quite good when I was a young boy. So I was playing on, at variety shows and some local fairs and these types of things. But as I was playing guitar, I was always speaking and engaging with the audience. And so by the time I was, in my early teens, I had a band, and we were playing in bars and touring the country, and I was the front man in that band. And then in my 20s, I got into the speaking business. And so, I've always been on stage in front of an audience and always the one doing all of the speaking with the audience. So,
because I think at that age, the fear isn't really there. So you never kind of had what most people do, because a lot of people, when they begin their careers, they're terrified. So the fact that your parents actually were having you on a stage at that age was fantastic. You didn't realize it at the time that it would end up being, your career being in front of people.
Yeah, I of course, I didn't realize it at the time, but I always dreamed of that. In fact, when I was growing up, I always dreamed of being a musician because I loved the music business. And I loved being on stage, from a very early age. And but then I found, by the time I reached my early 20s, I realized that in the music business, Roy, there's an old saying that says you're either eating steak or you're eating craft dinner or hot dogs. And I was eating craft dinner and hot dogs, and steak was nowhere in sight. So I just wasn't, realized that there were limits to my musical talents, but I really enjoyed being in front of the audience. And I stumbled across a video by a guy named Zig Ziglar, who I'm sure you've heard of. And I watched this guy on the video, and I thought, wow, I mean, this guy, he's got no equipment. He's got no bandmates. His audience isn't drunk. All he's got to do is say stuff. And that sounds like a pretty good job. And so I was very fascinated by that. So started to push through that. But what I tell people when they ask me how I got into speaking, what I tell them is, when in the music business, I ended up being a solo show where I was playing at bars, playing guitar and singing, and people would come and hear me sing, and they'd walk up to me and they'd say, Steve, maybe you should just say the words. And so I became a speaker.
And because I do not do even have cassette tapes. That just shows, how long I'm listening to motivational stuff. But I definitely have some CDs. But there was around the same era, you would have Dennis Waitley, Jim Rohn, and all that. So obviously, by listening to that, you're kind of into personal development. So what was your own career for actually kind of improving your skill when you decided to go in that direction?
Sure. So I decided I wanted to learn how to speak professionally, like the pros do. And so I joined an organization called the Dale Carnegie Training Organization. And I took all of their courses, and I was fascinated with the organization. And then I decided I wanted to become an instructor for them. So I trained as an instructor. And the whole time that I was working with them, I would watch the other instructors teach the class. And in my mind, I'm instructing each of the participants, And I found that a lot of the things that I felt would have been appropriate were not what the instructor did. And so I kept thinking, sometimes I agreed with what they did. Sometimes I didn't agree with what they did, but I always felt I could do that. That doesn't seem that difficult. And then one day, one of the instructors asked me if I wanted to try coaching somebody. So I said, sure. So the guy that I was coaching was the most difficult participant in the whole class. Like, he was a big, scary looking dude. He didn't want to be there. His boss had sent him there to learn some, people skills. And he was just non-participative, not engaged, and not positive at all. But that's the guy I got to coach. And so within a couple of seconds, I had that guy broken right through, and he just opened right up. And I remember thinking, I'm good at this. I can do this. And I had that moment, where sometimes you get these moments where you kind of validate why you're here and what you should be doing. And it was that kind of a moment. So I decided to become an instructor, and I got certified as an instructor, but I was just, it came time to sign the contract, because they have a at the time, very stringent contract for their instructors. But I couldn't sign the contract because I actually didn't agree with a lot of the things that they were teaching. And I didn't know why I didn't agree with it. Things just didn't feel right to me. So I left that organization and started my own, and started coaching speakers based on all the experience that I had had from childhood, being on stage, being in front of an audience. And so I started coaching them the way that I thought should be effective, and they started to get results. And so I just kept honing that, and a whole bunch of other things happened, through my life that validated some of the things that I was doing. But I learned a lot about psychology of speaking. I learned a lot about, the neuroscience behind it. And then soon that translated into using speaking to generate revenue. And so I started teaching people that, and it all just sort of happened that way.
Excellent. So I want to go into the psychology bit, but you've been past president of the Global Speakers Federation and also of the Canadian Association. So you might kind of, just for those that maybe are speakers or aspiring speakers, how you get into them and what exactly they cover.
Sure. Okay. So you're talking about the associations?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So in Canada, we have CAPS, the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers. And in the United States, there's NSA, National Speakers Association. In the UK, there's the PSA, Professional Speakers Association of the United Kingdom and Ireland. So Ireland has a chapter, as does Scotland. And so around the world, there are 17 of these associations. There's one in India, there's one in Singapore, there's one in Australia and New Zealand, and there are 17 of them around the world. So I was the president of the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers. And then when we have these 17 associations, they all belong to a central body called the Global Speakers Federation. So the Global Speakers Federation is the central hub for all 17 professional speaker associations around the globe. And so I became president of that. So that journey took me about 11 years to make it to that point. And I served for 1 year as the president in the Global Speakers Federation. And during that time, it was fascinating, Roy, because I got to visit all of the associations around the world. But sadly, my tenure as president was right in the time of COVID. And so I wasn't actually physically able to go out and visit all of them. I had visited many of them, including Ireland, and Scotland and many of the others. I had visited many of them years before, and I had spoken at all of them. But during my year as president of Global Speakers Federation, I spoke at every one of the 17 associations virtually, which meant I had to get up at 3 a.m. to speak, for Singapore or India or whatever. So it made for a very interesting year of non-travel travel.
And how did you kind of bring your A game when you had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning? Did you have techniques?
This is what we do. You just do. You wake up, you shake it off, you force down a coffee, and you go and you just do it.
So when people join these associations, one, do you have to have a certain level before they allow you in? And then is there like a mentorship that kind of helps you improve what you're doing?
Sure. Well, each one of the associations is self-governed. And so they all have their own rules, their own regulations. And so many of them have a minimum income requirements. So in Canada, you need to earn $50,000 as a speaker in order to qualify. But then they also have a different part of their association for people to come in as an associate member or as a future member, where they can be trained and they can be mentored into professional speakership. So a lot of the associations have such programs. Some of them don't. So they're different all around the world. But the common purpose of the speaker associations is not necessarily to train speakers, although most of them do, but that's not their primary function. Their primary function really is to create a community and bring professional speakers from around the world together to share best practices and to share opportunities and to sort of share the global knowledge and that type of thing. But it's a great camaraderie. It's a great way to connect with people in the industry.
So with the psychology of selling, I was listening to another show you were on, and it kind of brought back memories of when I was in some event, and the guy on stage is going, there's only 20 places, and trying to get people to run the end of the room. And I just thought it was kind of cringeworthy hearing that. So you might kind of touch on the psychology of selling.
Sure. So there's all different ways to sell when you speak, and especially in the speakers associations that we've been talking about, sales is kind of a dirty word, and it's kind of frowned upon. But the thing is, if we take the speaking world and if we break it up, simplify it and break it up into two categories, okay, we've got, the speak for a fee, which is where you go and you speak and you get paid and you leave and do the next one. And then we've got the speak to sell. I think you had a guest on your show some time ago, Christopher Howard. Christopher Howard was on your show. Sure. He talked about this, right? He talked a little bit about this. And so I did this plan for a while, speak for a fee and go from place to place to place. And it was great and it was fine and all those things. But then I discovered this other world about using speaking to drive business. And a lot of people are taught when they enter that world, a lot of them are taught that cringeworthy approach. Now, I can do the cringeworthy approach. I have done it, and it does work if it's done well. You can do very well that way. But what I've found is that most people find it cringeworthy. And when I'm delivering it, I find it cringeworthy. So here's what I've discovered over years of, honing this craft. And this is what I try and teach others is this. The fundamental principle about speaking, especially speaking to monetize, is that we need to understand that speaking is not about a transference of information. Speaking is about a transference of emotion. So my job as a speaker is to get you to feel about my message the way I feel about my message. Now, if I can get you to feel the way I feel, now we're on the same page and we're communicating well. So that's step number one. And then step number two is this. Whenever you speak in front of an audience, whether it's an audience of one, Roy, or an audience of 1,000, whenever you speak about yourself or your business, you're either positioning yourself as somebody they need or somebody they don't. And there are only two options, somebody they need or somebody they don't. And so if you can position yourself through speaking as somebody they need instead of somebody they don't, then all the cringeworthy stuff becomes not necessary. And I'll give you a very quick example, very simple example. I tell this story all the time because it works whenever I speak. I ask the audience this question. I'll say, put up your hand if you or somebody is in the market for a tennis instructor. Okay. Now I'll ask you, Roy, do you know anybody who's in the market for a tennis instructor?
Not sure, but I know a few people that play tennis, so I presume yes.
Okay. So you presume yes. If I have an audience of 100 people, usually maybe one person might say something like that. Usually their hands don't go up, right? So, nobody's, unless you're deliberately a tennis player and in the market for a tennis instructor, you're not walking the earth looking for a tennis instructor. But I tell the audience, I'll say this, let's say 100 people, I'm going to guess that at least 30 of you are in the market for a tennis instructor right now, or somebody who is. And I'm going to say that to you. I bet that you know somebody for sure who's in the market for a tennis instructor. And so the audience kind of thinks, well, how are you going to prove that? So I tell them about this guy named Brian. Brian came to me about, 20 years ago or something. And he said, Steve, I'm going to all the networking events. I'm shaking all the hands. I'm making all the phone calls. I'm meeting all the people. He says, I'm just not getting the business that I need. I said, well, Brian, what do you do? He says, I'm a tennis instructor. So we taught, we see what the market is for tennis instructors. It's very limited. So we taught Brian this principle that anytime you present, whether it's to one or 1,000, you're positioning yourself as either somebody they need or somebody they don't. And when Brian says, I'm a tennis instructor, he's positioning himself as somebody they don't need. So if you saw Brian today and you said, Brian, what do you do? He'd say, well, you know how sometimes kids, they have so much energy and they get so excited and they're bouncing off the walls and they're yelling and screaming and having fun, making all kinds of noise. And the parents get so frustrated because they have no idea what to do with these kids. He'd say, well, what I do is I take kids of any age, I bring them on a tennis court, and I absolutely exhaust them, and I hand them back to their parents. Then I ask the audience, put up your hand if you just might know somebody who just might be in the market for a tennis instructor. And all of a sudden, all the hands go up. Now, it's a true story, and it's a little shtick, but what it does do is it demonstrates the fact that how we speak and present about ourselves positions us in only one of two ways, either somebody they need or somebody they don't. And if we know how to speak and position ourselves in a way that positions us as somebody they need, then it becomes a whole lot easier to translate that into business. And so the whole psychology process happens in there. How do you strategically and tactically present yourself as somebody they need instead of somebody they don't? And then how do you do it without high-pressure sales tactics?
I love that. That's fantastic. So for those that are coaching then, I mean, because sometimes people, they have a certain niche as well. Mm-hmm. How did you name, because that was fantastic the way you spoke about the tennis court, but obviously that won't work with coaching because you can't put the kids into it. So have you any kind of examples for those that are coaching?
Yeah, well, so I'll talk about the concepts because the examples that we develop are different for everybody because like you said, everybody's different. But here's what coaches need to understand. And there's a big problem with coaches and a lot of our audience is coaches. And I made this mistake for decades, right? Not for years, but for decades. And coaches do this. Coaches coach. So when they get on a platform, whether it's a virtual platform or on a stage, the biggest mistake they make is they teach and they over-teach because they're taught to solve problems. They're taught to take a client who's got a problem and help the client solve a problem. That's what a coach does through coaching. So when they get on a stage, they try and solve the audience's problem and they give all kinds of solutions. And then what happens is the audience walks away with a list of to-dos, a list of solutions, and they believe their problem can now be solved. So they walk away and now they try and solve the problem, but they can't implement the things that they've learned in 30 minutes, 40 minutes, or an hour from the coach. So, it invariably fails, and then they point to the coach and say, your stuff doesn't work. And so what happens is now when we overteach, when we solve problems on the platform, all we're doing is positioning ourselves as somebody the audience doesn't need because they think they have it. They walk away. So what coaches and people who are really trying to use speaking to drive business, what we need to do is we need to give clarity on the problem, not solve it. That's what the tennis instructor does. It gives clarity around a problem that the audience may not even know they have. An audience wouldn't naturally draw a line between a tennis instructor and my rowdy kids. They don't draw that line until we reveal it to them. So as coaches who speak, our job is to reveal the straight line between us and the problem the audience has that they may not even think they have. They may not even know they have. So our job is to reveal the problem, not to solve the problem. And if we can reveal the problem, and here's the outlook we're looking for, the outcome we're looking for from our audience. We want the audience not to do this. We want the audience not to go, oh, great, I'm going to go and try that. That's not what we want. What we want is, I've never thought of it like that before. I'm doing the wrong thing. I need to try something different. I need that person to help me because I'm stuck. That's the result we're looking for when we speak. So that's the beginning of the psychology, is changing the audience's paradigms, challenging their beliefs a little bit, shaking what they believe to be true, and changing their perspective on the nature of their condition. Now we've positioned ourselves as somebody they need instead of somebody they don't.
So, #1 best-selling author 3 times. So is it about selling? What are your books about?
So the first book I wrote in 2011, and it's called From Stage Fright to Spotlight. And I noticed that you have something called From Stage Fright to Spotlight, don't you? I noticed it did I see that from you somewhere? No, I thought I saw something from you called From Stage Fright to Spotlight. But I just thought it was cool because, oh, wow, there's another same title. But I have a book that I wrote in 2011, From Stage Fright to Spotlight, and it's 99 speaker secrets to breaking the rules and mastering the stage. In fact, if it's okay, I'd like to, give a copy to your audience, a PDF copy. We can do that later. But I wrote that book because a lot of my clients were authors. They write a book and then they want to speak about it, which makes sense. A lot of my clients were authors, and I didn't have a book. I don't really like to write that much. At least I didn't at the time. And so I thought, so many of my clients are authors. I should probably be one. So I wrote the book, and it just sat there for quite a few years and did nothing. And then maybe 5 years ago or 6 years ago, we decided to pursue that. So we put the book out and we promoted it and we made it a #1 bestseller internationally. And then the next book I wrote is called Deep Thought Strategy. Now, Deep Thought Strategy is the strategy that I developed that I teach my high-end one-on-one clients. And this is about that process. This is about how do you present your content in a manner that appears to be different from everybody else, and that positions you as somebody they need instead of somebody they don't, by using a series of models. And so I wrote that book and put it out, and it became a #1 international bestseller. And then my wife Jane and I did a collaborative with Brian Tracy. So we did a collaborative with Brian Tracy and a number of our clients, and we put this whole book together called Emerge, and we put that out, and it became a #1 international bestseller. So those are the three.
Fantastic. So, I mean, a lot of this is coming down to marketing. A lot of speakers are aspiring authors, or they've created a book, but they think people will come running to buy it, and it doesn't happen. What tips have you got to help it to get to a #1 bestseller?
Here's the reality. On Amazon, it's not that difficult. You don't have to sell a lot of books. This is a sort of a misconception that I hear. We put the title 3-time #1 international best-selling author because our books, my books, they hit the #1 spot. That there's 3 of them internationally around the world. But in Amazon, and that's what it is. And Amazon, if you're a #1 best-selling author or a best-selling author, it's basically a snapshot in time. So, because Amazon has this algorithm that runs every hour. And what it does is it brings, I think, the 100 top selling books of that hour, and brings them up to the top and just take a snapshot of it, and you're a bestseller. So to do that, you're right. It's not a build it and they will come thing. So what we did is before we launched the book officially, we sent to our list and we said, we're going to be launching this, as a bestseller campaign. We could use your help, and we're going to give you a good price on the book if you purchase it at a certain time on a certain day. And we just counted that down, and everybody did, and we took our snapshots, and we were best-selling authors, So, and we just did that with 2 of the books, and then I think with the 3rd book, Emerge, this part was out of my hands. This is my wife and our team takes care of all of that, but I think we did something similar. But it's not, Amazon, it's not really that difficult.
So you've self-published all your books, have you?
Yeah, we self-published. The first one, Stage Fright to Spotlight, I did have a publisher, and that's how it got started. But we didn't agree on some things, so I fired them and just went, did it myself.
I talked to a lot of people that have written books, and a lot of the time they don't give you an upfront fee. Plus, it's like, no, you market it to your list and you do all the thing, and then we give you 50 cents or $1 if you're lucky per book. So.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, traditional publishers, they're more interested in your ability to market and sell the book than they are in your ability to write it. And that's not a knock against them. That's their business. They will place it, they'll get it into the bookstores, and they'll do those things for you, and they will market the book. But they really want to know that you have a platform. That's really the best way. I mean, my understanding of traditional publishers is that they don't just look for somebody who can write a book. They look for somebody who has a platform so the book can be sold. And then there's hybrid publishers, who you pay money to, and they do the work, and then you kind of split the profits. So there's all different ways to put books out there. And for us, the self-publishing was the best way to go, because really for us, our intention, it wasn't to sell millions of books. The intention was to use our books as a different, just an additional credibility step. Because we get this all the time, when I'm being asked on podcasts or different things, have you got a book? Yeah, well, I've got 3. So, I mean, it's just it's a great credibility booster.
So with the speaking and the coaching, marketing, I mean, that, to be honest, I wasn't aware of that Amazon tip. I think it's fantastic. That in itself is worth gold for those that were listening. So when you're marketing yourself then for both of that, what kind of tips could you give to people?
Well, it depends on what your desired outcome is. So my business focuses on people who want to use speaking to drive clients into their business, or I have, we talked about coaches. So I have coaches who have a program to fill, or experts who have thought leaders who have an idea to share. A lot of my clients are explorers who have climbed mountains, broken world records, paddled a homemade boat across the ocean, like crazy things, right? So a lot of them are explorers, and they've got stories to tell. A lot of them are survivors of horrific events and have lessons to share. So, it depends on what the outcome is. So somebody who wants to sell their products and services and generate business, the main thing for them, the main, tip for them is understanding that your job when you're speaking is to reveal a problem, not to solve it. And that's the main tip for generating revenue. For somebody who's got a big story to tell, the main tip would be this, even though you have a big story, and some of my clients have big life-altering, life-changing stories, the story is generally not what people are most interested in. What they're interested in is, how did you do it? And so you need to make sure and share some lessons with the audience. Make sure that you challenge the audience's beliefs again. Make sure that you inspire them, give them hope. So, the main tips are really about what is your desired outcome? And then let's work backwards and figure out a strategy to get you there, and then apply the tactics within that strategy to make sure that it stays on track and takes you to that space. But with speaking now, Roy, and, I don't have to tell you, I mean, you 6 podcasts, I mean, you're a busy guy, and you're speaking all the time because you speak on podcasts and on your own, and I'm sure you guest on others. And so you're using the spoken word in a very powerful way to reach the world. Other people want to do it with on a stage. Other people want to do it with their own webinars and their own virtual delivery. So there's so many different opportunities now for people to use the spoken word to generate business, or to share their message, or to change the world, that there's something for everybody. So the main tips really depend on what the desired outcome is.
And actually, that was something that I wanted to touch on as well, because I had seen that and I'd heard it about changing the world, because that was kind of my whole mission with this. It was all about trying to make the world a better place, but I realized I needed to become, to get good at speaking, overcome the fear of it, and that's why it was all kind of helping people. Because I think if you want to make change in the world, you definitely need people to listen, understand, and follow to make the change. So, touching on that, what's your kind of take on that? How do people can improve it there?
Yeah. The first thing, and you've heard this on your podcasts, I'm certain of it, is about mindset. And this is one of the primary things that I really worked on myself for years, and that I really encourage my clients to do. And that is, anytime you speak or present, to put yourself into a mindset of service. Like before I got on this call with you, I make a deliberate decision that my purpose is to serve. And I'll talk about whatever comes up, and I'll do my very best. But my purpose is to serve you and serve your audience. And at the same time, by extension, hopefully at some point it'll serve me. Somebody's going to be interested in this episode and visit my website or something. But that mindset of service is mission critical. And that means that anytime we speak in any format, whether it's stage, screen, virtual, live, if we put ourselves in that mindset of service to the audience, service to the host, service to the event, then the way we can serve is twofold. Number one is through our message, whatever that is. And number two is through the skills that we've developed to do this well. And so if we take those two things, the message, and combine it with the skill, and we adapt the mindset of service, then that's how we can really serve the world. That's how we can make change in this world. That's how we can influence and inspire other people.
I mean, like even there, like you gave reference to one of the previous episodes, so obviously you checked out the thing. And I go on other shows as well, and it's something I do. I listen to the few of the shows, I'm watching what they're doing, looking at their social media. But there's a lot of people don't. There's a lot of people, they just turn up and they just kind of wing it and see what it is. And then not bring it. The interview is never the same when it's like that. They have to kind of, it works both ways.
100% it works both ways. And, you used the word wing it. And, what I found is, and this is one of the things I've learned, is that nobody can really wing it well. Even, the best speakers in the world don't wing it well. What I say is this. I say you need to go through your content until your content comes through you. You need to go through your content until your content comes through you. And what that means is that you can do this. Like, this was not prepared, what you and I are doing. You didn't prepare these questions, and I didn't read them first. Like, oh, my little light keeps going off. We didn't have this kind of prepared thing. But I know my content so well that we can just talk about it. And this is what we want for your speakers. You need to go through your content till your content comes through you. And that way you don't have to wing it. It just comes up, and you can just chat about it.
Like I did a lot of speeches in Toastmasters, and I had my own club, and it was a case of, when somebody didn't turn up or somebody bailed, I go up and I do a speech just on the cuff and everything, and I was called out on it, and they said, look, it's good enough speech, but you're winging it. And it was like,
you're winging it.
We want you. And I was told that the next speech that I done, that I intentionally prepared a lot better. They said it was my best speech ever, better than one that had got into the final of 5 countries. So I was like, I don't do that anymore. Like, no matter what I'm doing, is like, don't wing it, because you're not serving the people that are there. Like, you might think, you're helping them because you're becoming a speaker when there's not much time, nobody else is going to do it. But you should have something prepared properly, that if that opportunity arises, rather than the wing it opportunity.
100%. And being prepared doesn't necessarily mean memorizing and reciting a speech, although it does. It can. And that's a legitimate way for some people. But most people in the professional speaking world, they only use a small amount of memorization. And what happens is and this is what I teach people to do, is memorize key phrases that are mission critical. Memorize key phrases. For example, the very first thing you say when you get on the stage should be memorized, recited, rehearsed, and mastered for all kinds of neurological and psychological reasons. And but there are key phrases in your presentation or in your talk that should be said in a very specific way, with very specific presentation and countenance and tone and all of that. So you need to memorize those pieces. But for most people at the professional level, they may say the same thing every time, but not because it's memorized. They say the same thing every time because it's internalized. They've gone through it until it comes through them. It's like saying your name. Your name isn't memorized. Your name is internalized. And so sometimes that means that you start with memorization, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it means knowing the content so that you can speak about the content and not necessarily repeat and recite the exact same thing every single time. And so, just because we stumble a little bit with some ums and some ahs and maybe, start over and a little bit of false starts, even though that happens, you can still be exceptionally well prepared if you know your content so well that it just comes through you, rather than always putting the pressure on yourself to memorize and recite a new speech every time you speak. I could never do that. That's way too much pressure for me. I would never be able to do that.
No, I mean, basically, the way I do it is I know exactly my intro and my conclusion. I know the points, what I want to do. And they're always kind of stories from the heart anyway. So it's not as if I have to memorize it. I just need to remember I'm talking about these different things. And
Exactly. That's precisely right. Yeah.
So you've got fantastic experience internationally.
Mm-hmm.
For those that are kind of maybe just getting, like, there's a lot of listeners from America, and then they decide they want to do Europe and do Asia and all this. You've spoken all over. What things did you kind of learn that's you kind of cringe and go, oh, I wish I hadn't done that when you were kind of speaking in all different countries?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm trying to think about if there's anything that made me go, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. And I'll give you one example. Knowing what's sensitive to other people in the world that are not necessarily sensitive to us. So, for example, I had a template that I created, and it was called the Killer Keynote Template, and it was for speakers to help create what in America we would call, that's a killer keynote, So we create a killer keynote template. Then I was speaking in, I think it was Singapore, and part of the program was I was doing a session for speakers on how to create a killer keynote. And the organizer asked me if I could change the name from Killer Keynote to something else, because they were very sensitive about that name on that side of the world. And I thought, I didn't know that. So I've changed it to the High Impact Keynote. And so that was the first experience where I remember thinking, I need to be a little bit more sensitive to what's sensitive to them, to the people around the world. And so when I do speak elsewhere, and I haven't been across the world since COVID, mostly it's just been, Canada and the United States since COVID. But when I do, when I was speaking around the world, I became very aware to ask my host, are there any specific subjects that are sensitive? And I always stay away from politics. I always stay from religion. I always stay from, social, big social topics like, the sex and gender and all those things. I keep those completely out of my world when I'm speaking. But I want to know, are there any local events that I should be commenting on? Are there any local situations that I should avoid? I just want to try and be aware, because if I put myself in a mindset of service, like we talked about before, then those things become pretty important. Then I want to make sure that I'm not offending people. So there's nothing else I can think of that makes me go, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. That was the only one.
And with kind of the different equipment that you use then, like between holding the mic, the headpiece, and because like what I see is some is the kind of advice, put it by the chin, because you'd hear people, the breathing and the, every time they're talking, they get in the puff sign. But like, just with your experience, was there any things that you kind of have learned to make sure this doesn't happen, because you've realized it doesn't come across as good?
Yeah, so for me, and this is, again, speaker's preference, right? So for me, I hate the handheld mic. I avoid it like the plague, because I'm very like this, right? I want to, and oftentimes when I speak, I use 2 flip charts. I don't use PowerPoint. I use flip charts, and I go back and forth, and I'm drawing and I'm scribbling, and it's very, like this on stage. And so when I use a handheld mic, I find it extremely restrictive. So I don't use handheld mics. I use this. And I make sure that it's put on properly and that it's got the little wind thing on it. And I'm just, very careful of that. Or I'll use a lav. Now, sound people hate lavs, because lavs are almost impossible to get decent sound. They feedback very easily. And whenever your voice changes from here to here, and as soon as you go sideways, the level of the voice changes. But for me, that becomes the sound person's challenge as a speaker, not mine. And so it's their job to make me sound good, and I empathize with them, but I need my hands free. So that's me. And so the other thing, that there's so many of these things, and a lot of them are in the book, from Stage Fright to Spotlight, but here's a couple. Watch for gaps in the stage. I remember I walked out on the stage one time. I had been introduced, and the stages, a lot of the stages are pieces and they're pushed together, right? And some of them are on wheels. The big heavy ones some of them are on wheels. They push them together and then they lock the wheels. And so I walked out onto this stage, and whoever put the stage up did not lock the wheels. And when I stepped on the crack in the middle, it opened up just enough for my leg to go right through the crack. And so I was standing on the stage with my one leg through the crack of the stage and one on the stage. And I hadn't said anything yet. Fortunately, the universe provides. And so what came to me was And this is how I opened up the presentation. I said, don't mind me. It's just a stage I'm going through. And that worked, right? And of course, everybody laughed and it worked. But there are other things that happen that don't work. And so what I've learned is we need to be open to being flexible when things happen that we don't expect. Like the PowerPoint goes out, which has happened to me many times. It won't work, or the projector blew up, or the fire alarm goes off, or things happen, right? And so what we need to do is we need to go with the flow and act like it was exactly what was supposed to happen. And if there's any way we can take credit for it, like if there's a way we can work it into our show somehow. So I'll give you an example. A friend of mine is a magician, and he was performing at an event. And as he was performing, an earthquake hit. And when the earthquake hit, the place started to shake. Now, it shook, but not enough for people to scramble. It was like, people were like this. And as soon as it started to shake, he stopped his show, and he started to go like this with his hands. And he's going like this and going like this and going like this. And then when the shaking came down, he went like this, he went like this. And then at the end, he said, now, who wants to see me do that again? It was perfect. So we need to be able to adapt to all the things that are going to happen, because they're going to happen. If they haven't happened to you yet, they're going to happen. So be aware and just try and have fun with them.
I remember one time doing a speech in a room for Toastmasters as well, and two flip charts, or not two, the cameras, the overhead cameras, just broke, two. And it was like, but when I did this, I just done the display on an iPad. That's all I could do, because with the speech, you had to see what I was showing. And just people gathered around, and it was like 20, 30 people in the room. So it wasn't too bad. It was able to I won't say but it worked rather than not doing the speech, because I kind of said, I'd come to do this. So that's what I did.
But that's a great experience for them. I mean, that is such a unique experience for them and you, that's one that you remember. It's one that they remember. And I bet you they learned more because of that experience. So this is one of the things that we have to be aware of, is whenever we have these kind of technical things, how it affects the event is totally up to us as a speaker. One speaker that I saw in CAPS, very prominent, statesperson, a very prominent statesman in the speaking business, was speaking. About 400 people in the audience, and we were there. And his entire presentation was based on a video that needed to be shown at the beginning of his talk. The video wouldn't play. And the sound guys, for some reason, they just could not get the video to play. And this master speaker had nowhere to go, literally had nothing to say, which was painful, very, very painful for him, for us, for everybody. And so all because for some reason he didn't prepare a plan B and never asked himself, what happens if the video doesn't play? So we need to have a plan B for every single. What happens if the video doesn't play? What happens if the slides don't work? I've had speakers speak at my event who were unable to speak because their PowerPoint wouldn't work. And I said, well, can you speak without it? No, I really need it. They weren't able to do it. And in the professional world, this is not acceptable. This is not acceptable. And we need to have a plan B. We need to be able to go with the flow of just about everything. I've spoken to a room of 300 people when no microphones would work. And I stand on the stage and I just speak really loud. Can you hear me at the back? Yes. Okay, let's go. And just do it. It has to happen. I'll tell you this other story. My daughter's 16th, it was her high school graduation. And it was in a big auditorium. She went to a large school, big auditorium, about 300 people. And the valedictorian, 16-year-old kid, he gets up, he's ready to do his valedictorian speech. Now, if you're the valedictorian and you're, you know what that is? Like I don't know if you have that in the UK, like you're the student of the year kind of thing, and you give the speech, right? And just as they called his name, there was a lightning strike and all the power went out in the building. And then, and when the power goes out, those emergency electric lights come on, the emergency battery powered lights. And so it just so happened that there was one of those lights just shining on the microphone, and it was a very dim light. Everything else was pitch black. And he walked up to the microphone. He had his pages for his speech, but he couldn't read them. So he just put them down and he gave his speech without a microphone to about 300 people in the dark with just this one dull light on him, and it was one of the best speeches I've ever heard. He didn't miss a beat. Everybody heard every word, and it was like it was exactly what was supposed to happen. And so this young man ended up being one of the most memorable speakers in my mind, because everything went wrong, but he just made it work. And that's what we have to do. We have to make it work.
I remember in Mind Valley, I was doing a speech in Mind Valley, and my computer just didn't work, but I had it all prepared on a USB just in case. So that was, and another thing is I always bring the pilot or the remote control that you can do the slides. I have my own one. So when there's a problem with it, because sometimes they just fail, and I make sure the spare battery and everything. And they might seem like simple things, but there's times I have seen people, they can't do nothing because that doesn't work, or they're telling people next slide, and that's a bit cringeworthy as well, when a simple thing of just having an extra battery might actually get them out of that.
Yeah.
So
these things are going to happen.
No, definitely. So just finally, right? You mentioned about the flip charts, and I'm just curious that. Because sometimes with the PowerPoint, what I see is, the people are turning back and they're reading the thing. The flip chart, you have to turn around, because unless you're a skilled ninja and you can write behind your back, how do you navigate that? And why have you found that the flip charts are kind of giving you a better connection with the...
Sure. Okay. So when I speak in one of my keynotes, there's models that I draw that I created, and they're connected. And what I found is when I do it on a PowerPoint slide, it's like this. People are looking at me, then they're looking at the slide. Then they're looking at me, then they're looking at the slide. I want this. I want eyeballs on me all the time, because I'm doing them, I'm working, and I find better engagement this way. So when I put the flip chart, I've learned not to turn my back. So the flip chart is here. I write like this. I'm facing the audience. I write like this. Okay. And when I go to the one on the other side, I do the same thing. I get on the far side of it. I write like this. Then I get between them, and I'm pointing to them, and this goes there and this goes there, and because they relate to each other. And I walk back and forth. It gives me purposeful movement on the stage. It puts space on the stage that have important elements in it. So the audience sees me, they see the flip charts, and they connect and so they're always watching. The other thing is that when I'm speaking in larger venues, they have the jumbo screens, and so they usually zoom in and they can see. But even when they don't, what I found, and I spoke in Singapore to about 500 people, and there was no big jumbo screen, and I'm on flip charts. I use big thick markers. I'm on flip charts, and I can see people in the back, and they're going like this, and they're drawing. I mean, that kind of attention, that kind of effort to put that kind of attention in, you can't pay for that. I mean, there is no amount of money that can pay for that much attention from people, rather than just sitting here watching a slide. So even when they can't see it well, they come up after the presentation, they take pictures, they come up and ask questions. It's huge engagement for me, and I just have a lot of fun doing it. And so I don't use slides. And when I train people, I tell them this: the only reason you should use a PowerPoint slide, and this is, my judgment. So the only reason you should use a PowerPoint slide is when there is no other way to express the information. So I'll give you a quick example. I have a client in New Zealand who lost a leg when he was mountain climbing. So what happened was he had all kinds of slides when he was speaking, but he only really needed two. And one of them was this: he lost a leg because the mountain erupted, and he was buried for 24 hours or something up to his waist, and lost a leg. So we needed the audience to see the magnitude of the damage to the leg, because the words could not express the magnitude of what. So we presented the audience, said, this is going to be squeamish, this is going to be gross, but I need to show you this, so you can close your eyes if you want to. So he shows the picture of the mangled leg, and it's like, whoa, like audience goes, whoa, like he gets that, right? Then the next part of the story is this: he had a prosthetic leg, and he started mountain climbing again, but he was never able to beat that mountain, the one that erupted. He would go and try, and he would fail. And he did other mountains, and he would try that one, and he would fail. And it kind of became his life mission to beat that mountain, and he couldn't do it. So he tells the story, and there's no PowerPoint slides. And then the very last PowerPoint slide is him standing on the summit of that mountain with his prosthetic leg holding the flag. And there are no words that can express that moment, because we built it up so large. So his entire presentation only required 2 slides. And we took the other 36 out because they weren't needed. So what I tell people is when there's no other way to express the information other than visually, then we consider slides. Other than that, you're a professional speaker. Create visuals with your words. And this is all kinds of neuroscience behind this. We don't have time, I'm sure, today. But, people will say, well, what about the visual learners? And that's not a valid argument because there's a whole track we can go down here. But here's the thing. You create, as a speaker, as an orator, you create visuals in the audience's mind by virtue of your language. And not just your words, but your facial expressions, your body language, your countenance, your energy, everything that's about you that expresses, places a picture in the audience's mind if you do it well. And that's the visual. Because when the audience looks at a picture, it's like a snapshot with their eyeballs. But when they create the image in their own mind, because you guide the image with your words, they become a co-author of the story rather than just a passive recipient. And so this is what I try and encourage my clients to do, is create the image in the audience's mind with your words rather than just show them a picture. Anybody can show them a picture. Show them how to create the image themselves, show them how to attach the proper emotional context to it, and then take them on the journey that they create in the mind's eye.
Listen, Steve, thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. You gave some really golden tips, especially the Amazon one. That's fantastic. And all the stuff that you've shared with us has been brilliant. And I know that you've mentioned about your first book on the PDF, so I presume you'll be able to send me the link for that. I can include in the show notes, but you might let people know how they can find you.
Yeah, so they can find me. The best thing to do is go to stevelowell.com, stevelowell.com. And then if you go to stevelowell.com/free-book, all lowercase, stevelowell.com/free-book. There's a copy of my first book, From Stage Fright to Spotlight. You can download the PDF instantly there and enjoy the read.
I'll make sure I'll put the links, the audio and the video. Thank you very much, Steve.
Terrific. Well, thanks for having me. This has been great.
No problem. So that's all for the Speaking Podcast. You'll find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com. Until next week, take care. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. As mentioned at the start, you can find my 6 podcasts on roycollin.com or scan the QR code if you're looking to start a podcast or do a podcasting tour, help with that. Also, if you're looking for a virtual assistant, we also have that service. And you can help the show by visiting the store, supporting our sponsors, or making a donation. Until next week, take care.